I didn't expect you to fake his signature, Ariana, but I guess people surprise you when money's involved. My Uncle Victor said it calmly, like he was commenting on the weather, not accusing me of fraud in front of my entire family. The room went quiet. Too quiet. On the table between us sat a document I had never seen before, bearing my grandfather's name in a signature that looked almost perfect. Too perfect. My stomach dropped. When had he signed this? Why didn't I know about it? And why did it look nothing like the shaky handwriting I'd seen just weeks before he died? Mr. Collins, our family lawyer, cleared his throat. We've already consulted a handwriting expert. I felt every eye turn toward me. Then the door opened, and the man who walked in didn't look at me. He looked straight at Victor. If you're watching this from somewhere else, tell me your country and what time it is where you are right now. I didn't think I'd ever have to prove my own innocence to my own family. So if you want to hear how this unfolded, stay with me and consider subscribing. 2 weeks before my grandfather died, I was sitting across from him at his kitchen table, watching his hand tremble as he tried to pour coffee into a chipped ceramic mug he refused to throw away. Still think you can outwork me? He asked, smiling like he always did when he was about to lose an argument. I don't have to outwork you, Grandpa, I said, reaching over to steady the pot before it spilled. I just have to keep up. That was our rhythm. Quiet competition, quiet understanding, which is why the document Victor shoved in front of me didn't make sense. Not the timing, not the signature, not the story he was telling. I work in financial compliance. My job is to spot inconsistencies before they turn into fraud cases, irregular signatures, unusual transactions, documents that look right at a glance but fall apart under scrutiny. It's not glamorous, but it trains you to notice things other people ignore. And what I saw on that page wasn't just wrong, it was constructed. Ariana. Victor said now, leaning back in his chair like he was presiding over something official. Well, this isn't something we can just overlook. You know how serious this is. His tone wasn't angry. That would have been easier to deal with. It was measured, controlled, like he had already decided how this was going to end. I didn't sign anything, I said. My voice came out steady even though my pulse wasn't. And Grandpa didn't sign that either. Not like that. Denise let out a short, incredulous laugh from across the table. Oh, come on, she said. You really expect us to believe that I turned toward her? Believe what exactly? That you just happened to be the only one with access to him the week before he passed, she said. That you brought paperwork with you because I saw you and now you're acting like you don't know where this came from? The words landed harder than Victor's accusation. Because Denise wasn't guessing. She sounded certain. I didn't bring any paperwork, I said. And whatever you think you saw, it wasn't that. She crossed her arms. I know what I saw, Ariana. For a second, I almost questioned myself. Memory can do that under pressure, shift blur, make you second-guess details you were sure about. But then something in what she said caught. The week before he passed. I replayed it quickly in my head. Work deadlines, meetings, late nights at the office. And then it clicked. That day you're talking about, I said, slowly turning fully toward her. Now what day was it? Denise frowned. Tuesday. Late afternoon. Tuesday. I felt something settle into place inside me. Not relief yet, but direction. Then I wasn't there, I said. Victor let out a quiet exhale like he'd been waiting for me to say something like that. Ariana, this isn't going to help you. I'm not trying to help myself, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm telling you you're wrong. He shook his head slightly. We have the document. We have a witness. And we have an expert prepared to testify that the signature shows signs of forgery. Prepared. Not reviewing. Not analyzing. Prepared. I noticed the word the same way I notice numbers that don't balance. Then let him say that I replied, because I didn't do it. Mr. Collins shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Why don't we take a step back? No, Victor cut in gently but firmly. We're past that point. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just suspicion. It was a narrative, and I had already been cast in it. I looked back down at the document. The signature was clean, confident. The kind of line you only get when your hand is steady and your mind is clear. But 2 weeks ago, I had watched my grandfather struggle to hold a pen long enough to write his own name. So either something had changed dramatically in those final days, or someone had made sure it looked like it had. I can prove I wasn't there, I said. Denise rolled her eyes. Of course you can. I can. I repeated this time more firmly. My office logs badge entries, cameras in the lobby, system access timestamps. I was at work that entire afternoon. Victor's expression didn't shift much, but I saw at the smallest flicker of recalibration. He hadn't expected that. It wouldn't be the first time someone stepped out for a few hours, he said. I didn't, I said. And if you want to go down that road, we can pull everything. For the first time since I walked into the room, I wasn't reacting. I was building something, a timeline, a structure, something that didn't rely on who people believed, but on what could be proven. Mr. Collins cleared his throat again. If Ariana can establish an alibi, then we may need to reassess. Victor raised a hand, slightly stopping him. Not aggressively. Just enough. We'll review whatever she provides, he said. Then he looked at me again. But understand this, Ariana. If this goes further, it won't stay inside this room. There it was. Not a threat. A consequence. Carefully framed. I held his gaze. Then I guess it's a good thing I didn't do anything wrong. The silence that followed felt different this time. Less certain, less controlled, but not resolved. Not even close, because Denise was still watching me like she was waiting for me to slip. Because Victor still looked like a man who had already planned 3 steps ahead. And because sitting right there on the table was a document that shouldn't exist, signed by a man who just days before could barely hold a pen. I stood up slowly, gathering my bag. I'll send everything over, I said. Logs, timestamps, whatever you need. Victor nodded once. Do that. I turned to leave, but just before I reached the door, Mr. Collins spoke again. Ariana. Just so you're aware, he said carefully, the notary listed on that document is Thomas Hale. The name meant nothing to me at first, but the way he said it like it should made me pause. Okay, I said. And Mr. Collins hesitated for half a second. Then he said, he's worked closely with your uncle in the past. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because suddenly the document didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like something that had been arranged. And if that was true, then whoever put my name into this story had started writing it long before I walked into that room. I didn't go straight home. I drove past my building, circled the block once, then parked 2 streets over like I needed distance to think clearly. Because once something shifts from confusion to intent, you don't just react to it, you map it. And that's what this was now. A structure. A version of events that had been built carefully enough to survive first contact, but not necessarily a deeper look. I pulled out my phone and called Lena. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, what's wrong? She didn't ask how I was. She never did when she heard that tone in my voice. I need you, I said. And I need you to think like you're about to dismantle a fraud case. There was a brief pause. Then, okay, I'm listening. I've been accused of forging my grandfather's signature on a legal document, I said, keeping it tight factual. There's a notary, there's a supposed witness. And there's already a handwriting expert lined up against me. Another pause. Longer this time. That escalated fast, she said quietly. Do you have anything to counter it? I have something better than something, I said. I have data. That got her attention. Come over, she said. Bring everything you remember. By the time I got to her apartment, she already had her laptop open, legal pads spread across the table, and that look she gets when she's about to pick something apart piece by piece. Start from the moment Denise claims she saw you, Lena said, not looking up. Tuesday. Late afternoon, I replied. 2 weeks before my grandfather passed. She nodded. Okay. What do you know for sure? I was at work, I said. All day. That's not enough, she said immediately. You need timestamps, entry logs, system activity, something external. I know, I said. My company tracks badge access, and our systems log every login, every action. Good, she said, finally looking up. Then we build a timeline that doesn't rely on your word. That was the key. Not what I remembered. What I could prove. I logged into my company portal and pulled up my activity history. Emails, internal systems access logs. Here, I said, turning the screen toward her. Login at 8:07 a.m. Continuous activity through the afternoon. System flags idle time if you're inactive more than 10 minutes. She leaned in. Scroll. I did. Timestamp after timestamp filled the screen. Reports opened. Files reviewed. Notes logged. At 3:42 p.m. right in the window, Denise claimed she saw me. I had accessed a compliance audit file that required multi-factor authentication. You can't fake this easily, Lena said. Not without leaving a trail. Exactly. Do you have building access logs too? I nodded. Security badge. And there are cameras in the lobby. Then we request both, she said. You don't just say you were there, you show you never left. For the first time since the meeting, I felt something steady under my feet. Not relief, but leverage. Lena started writing. Okay, that handles your alibi. Now let's talk about the document. I exhaled slowly. It's been notarized. She stopped writing. Of course it has, she muttered. The notary is Thomas Hale, I added. Her pen hovered midair. That name again, she said. You know him. Not personally, she said, but I've seen his name come up. He does a lot of private notarizations for estate work. Victor's estate work, I said. She met my eyes. That's a problem. I figured. Not because it proves anything by itself, she said, but because it creates a relationship, and relationships create patterns. I leaned back slightly. So we're not just looking at a document. No, she said. We're looking at a process. Who drafted it? Who presented it? Who witnessed it? Who benefited from it? Benefited. That word settled heavier than the others. Victor controls most of the family assets, I said. Or at least he did. And this document changes what exactly Lena asked. I hesitated. I haven't seen the full breakdown, but from what I could tell, it shifts a portion of property into a structure I'm supposedly involved in. Her eyebrows lifted. Involved how like I requested it, I said. Like I initiated the transfer. So the narrative is you manipulated your grandfather into signing something that benefits you, she said. Right. She tapped her pen against the table. Then the easiest way to make that believable is to make it look clean, I repeated. Legally clean, she said. Proper signatures, notarization, a witness, a timeline that fits just enough to pass a surface check, and someone willing to say they saw me there, I added. Exactly. We sat in silence for a moment, both looking at the same invisible outline. It wasn't messy. That was the problem. Messy fraud falls apart quickly. Clean fraud takes work and planning. Lena, I said slowly, if this was built ahead of time. She finished the thought for me. Then your name wasn't added as an afterthought. It was placed there, deliberately. I looked back at the screen at the timestamps that proved where I had been. They expected me not to check, I said. Or not to have anything to check with, she replied. I shook my head slightly. Victor knows what I do for a living, which means Lena said either he underestimated you, or he thought the rest would outweigh it, I said. The witness, the notary, the expert, she added. Stack enough authority around a claim and people stop asking questions. That's how most financial manipulation works, not by hiding the lie, by surrounding it with just enough truth. Lena leaned back. We're going to request the building footage, the badge logs, and we're going to formally document your alibi. And the notary, I asked. She gave a small, thoughtful smile. We don't accuse him, she said. Not yet. Then what we ask questions he can't answer cleanly, she said, and we see where he slips. I nodded slowly, because that was the part I understood best. You don't break a story by attacking it head on. You let it unravel under pressure. I closed my laptop, but something still felt off. There was one piece I couldn't place yet. The handwriting expert, I said. They already have one. Lena frowned slightly. That's fast. Too fast, I said. Like it was already arranged. She didn't respond immediately. Then she said, Do you know who it is? I shook my head. Not yet. She exhaled. Okay, then that's another angle. Because if they brought someone in that quickly, it means they weren't waiting for the document to be questioned. They were waiting for me to be. Exactly. The room felt quieter after that, heavier, because the picture was clearer now. And it wasn't just about proving I wasn't there. It was about understanding how many parts of this had been set in motion before I ever knew there was a problem. Lena stood up and grabbed her keys. Where are you going? I asked. To check something, she said. What? She looked back at me, her expression sharper than before. I want to know how often Thomas Hale has notarized documents for your uncle. I felt something tighten in my chest. Because if the answer was what I thought it might be, then this wasn't just a one-time setup. It was a pattern. And patterns don't just expose what happened. They expose who's been getting away with it. The next morning, I didn't wait for Lena to come back with answers. I went straight to Thomas Hale's office. It was in a quiet commercial building, downtown glass doors, neutral carpeting, the kind of place designed to feel official without drawing attention. His name was printed in clean black letters beside a row of other professionals who all looked interchangeable on paper. Notaries don't usually matter. They're supposed to be neutral, invisible. Just a checkpoint in the process, which is exactly why this one mattered. I stepped inside and gave my name at the front desk. The receptionist hesitated for half a second when I mentioned Hale, then picked up the phone. He'll see you, she said. That was faster than I expected. Another small thing that didn't quite fit. Hale's office was neat in a way that felt rehearsed. Papers stacked too precisely. Desk cleared except for a single leather folder and a pen placed parallel to its edge. He stood when I walked in. Ariana Morgan, he said, offering a polite smile. I was told you might stop by. Of course he was. I'll keep this simple, I said, not taking the chair he gestured toward. I want to talk about a document you notarized 2 weeks ago. My grandfather's. His expression didn't change. If anything, it settled further into professionalism. I notarize many documents, he said. You'll have to be more specific. I pulled a printed copy from my bag and placed it on his desk. This one. He glanced at it briefly, just enough to acknowledge recognition, not enough to show reaction. Yes, he said. I recall the signing. Walk me through it, I said. He folded his hands. Your grandfather presented identification. He appeared coherent and aware of what he was signing. I witnessed him execute the document and applied my seal accordingly. Every word was clean, practiced. And you're certain about his condition, I asked. Yeah, because according to his medical records, I said evenly, he had significant tremors and cognitive decline at that point. That was the first shift. Not in his face, in the pause. Brief, controlled. But there. I can only speak to what I observed at the time, he said, which is that he was stable enough to produce a signature like that. I pointed lightly at the page. Yes. I leaned forward slightly. Did he sign it in front of you? Of course. No assistance, no guidance, no one holding his hand. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I said, What time was the signing? He didn't hesitate this time. Late afternoon. Do you have the exact time? It would be recorded in my log. Then let's look at it. For the first time, he hesitated longer than a second. It's standard practice to maintain records, he said carefully. But they're not always accessible on demand. I'm not asking for a copy, I said. Just confirmation. Another pause. Then he stood and moved to a cabinet behind his desk. He opened it, flipped through a set of bound logs, and pulled one out. He didn't hand it to me. He set it on the desk and angled it slightly toward himself. I stepped closer anyway. Here, he said, pointing to an entry. Date names notarization completed. I scanned it quickly. The names were there. The date matched. But something else didn't. There's no time, I said. It's not always required, he replied. It is when identity or capacity could be questioned, I said, especially in estate-related documents. He looked at me more directly now. You seem very familiar with procedural standards. I am. That part didn't need explaining. I let my eyes move across the rest of the page. Most entries were filled in fully names, dates, notes. This one was lighter, less detailed, like it had been written quickly. Or later. Did anyone else accompany him, I asked. Yes, Hale said. Your uncle was present. Of course he was. That answered more than the rest of the conversation combined. I tapped the page lightly, and he didn't say anything, didn't assist. He was there as a family member, not as someone directing the process, no. The answer came too quickly this time. I straightened up. Did my grandfather speak much, I asked. Yes, Hale said. He acknowledged the document and confirmed his intent. Verbatim, I asked. I don't record conversations. Convenient. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he said, Ms. Morgan, I understand this is a difficult situation, but my role is limited. I observed, I verified, and I notarized. Based on what you were shown, I said. Based on what I witnessed. I held his gaze, because there it was again, that distinction. What he was shown, what he witnessed, not the same thing. Not always. I picked up the document and slid it back into my bag. One last question, I said. He nodded slightly. Have you notarized documents for my uncle before A beat? Then yes. How often I don't keep a tally. Enough to recognize his requests. Yes. That was all I needed. I gave a small nod. Thank you for your time. As I turned to leave, he added, If there are further legal inquiries, I would prefer they go through proper channels. I'm sure they will, I said, and I meant it. Because this conversation hadn't proven anything outright. But it had done something just as important. It had shown me where the gaps were. The missing time. The incomplete notes. The careful wording. And most of all, it confirmed that Victor hadn't just been present. He had been positioned. When I stepped back out into the hallway, my phone buzzed. A message from Lena. I opened it immediately. Pulled records on Hale. It read, "You need to see this. Call me." I didn't call. I dialed before I even reached the elevator. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me," I said. There was no preamble on her end. No small talk. No setup. Just one sentence. He's notarized at least 9 estate-related documents for Victor in the last 3 years. I stopped walking. 3 years, I repeated. Minimum, she said, and that's just what I could access quickly. 9 documents. Same notary, same family, same control. This isn't random, I said quietly. No, Lena replied. It's a pattern. I leaned back against the wall, staring at nothing. Because patterns don't just suggest possibility, they suggest intent. And Ariana, Lena added, her voice tightening slightly. One of those documents was signed just 2 days before your grandfather passed. Something cold moved through me. Was it another transfer, I asked. I don't know yet, she said. But whatever it is, it means the document they're accusing you over might not be the only one. I closed my eyes for a second, because suddenly this wasn't just about proving I didn't do something, it was about figuring out how much had been done without anyone questioning it, and how long Victor had been operating inside that silence. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of what Victor might do next, but because my mind wouldn't let go of the pattern Lena had uncovered. 9 notarized estate documents. Same notary, same uncle. Same quiet authority no one had ever questioned. And now one of them had my name on it. By morning I knew exactly where I needed to go. St. Andrew's Medical Center. My grandfather had been admitted there twice in the final month of his life. Once for a fall. Once for what they described as neurological instability, a phrase that sounded clinical enough to be neutral but vague enough to hide a lot. Hospitals always smell the same, clean, controlled, and faintly like something being held back. I walked up to the records desk and gave my name. I'm Ariana Morgan, I said. I'm requesting access to my grandfather's medical records. William Hayes. The woman behind the desk glanced up already halfway into a polite refusal. Are you listed as a medical proxy or legal representative? No, I said. But I am listed in his estate documentation, and there is an ongoing legal dispute involving his capacity at the time of signing. That made her pause. I'll need to check with administration, she said. Of course. I stood there, hands resting lightly on the counter, trying not to feel like I was asking permission to understand what had already been done to him. 10 minutes later, a different staff member approached, older, more measured. Miss Morgan, she said. I'm Karen Lewis, records supervisor. We can't release full files without proper authorization, but we can review relevant notes with you under supervision. It wasn't full access, but it was enough. Thank you, I said. They brought me into a small consultation room. A tablet was placed in front of me, already open to my grandfather's file. I didn't rush. This wasn't something you skim. You read medical records the same way you read financial statements, looking for what's there and what isn't. Dates, symptoms, observations, patterns. Here, Karen said, tapping the screen. This is from the week you're referencing. I leaned closer. Patient exhibits significant tremor in dominant hand. Difficulty maintaining grip. Intermittent confusion regarding time and recent events. I read it again, then again. Because this wasn't mild decline. This was documented impairment. Scroll, I said quietly. Karen did. Requires assistance with complex decision-making. Family member present during most consultations. Which family member? I asked. She hesitated. It's not always specified. Is it specified anywhere? She tapped again, moving further down the notes. Here, she said. I read the line carefully. Primary family contact Victor Hayes. Of course. Was he listed as medical proxy, I asked. No, she said. But he was consistently present. Present. The word echoed differently now. Present at consultations. Present during decision-making. Present at the notary. Everywhere that mattered. Was there ever a note about his cognitive capacity improving, I asked. Karen shook her head. No. If anything, it was declining. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something sharper. Certainty. Because whatever Thomas Hale had claimed he witnessed, it didn't align with this. Can I see the exact date of the notarized document, I asked. Karen pulled it up. I compared it to the medical entries. Same week, same window, same documented symptoms. He couldn't have signed that I said more to myself than to her. Karen didn't respond. She didn't need to. I kept reading. There was one more note further down. Shorter than the others. Patient relies heavily on family member for communication. Displays signs of deference when addressed in presence of said individual. I stared at that line longer than I should have. Deference. Not agreement. Not clarity. Deference. That's not consent. That's pressure dressed up as cooperation. Can I get a copy of these specific entries, I asked? Karen nodded. We can provide excerpts relevant to your stated legal concern. Please. While she prepared the file, I sat back and let everything settle into place. Victor didn't need my grandfather to be fully aware. He just needed him to appear aware. He didn't need a perfect process. He just needed a process that looked intact from the outside. And he had built exactly that. A notary who confirmed what he observed. A document that looked clean. A family that trusted him enough not to question it. And me, placed right in the middle of it. As the explanation. As the distraction. Karen handed me a sealed envelope. Everything in here is documented, she said. If this goes to court, it will carry weight. I know, I said. And I did, because this wasn't emotional evidence. It was clinical, objective, the kind that doesn't bend under pressure. As I stood to leave, Karen added, Ms. Morgan, I'm sorry for your loss. I nodded, but for the first time since the funeral, the loss felt different. Less like something that had happened to me, more like something that had been used. Outside, the air felt sharper, clearer. I pulled out my phone and called Lena. I have the medical records, I said as soon as she answered. Good, she replied. Because I have something too. What? There was a brief pause. Then she said, that document Victor mentioned, the one he hasn't shown yet. My grip tightened slightly around the envelope. Yeah, I think I found a reference to it, she said. And Ariana, it might change everything about what he's really trying to do. I stopped walking. What do you mean? It's not just about transferring assets, she said. Then what is it about another pause? Longer this time. Then it's about control. I drove to Victor's house that evening without calling first. If Lena was right, and she usually was, then whatever he was doing wasn't just about money. It was about who got to decide what happened to everything after my grandfather was gone. Control doesn't always look like greed. Sometimes it looks like responsibility, like keeping things in order, like someone stepping in when others don't want to deal with the mess. Victor had built his entire reputation on that version of himself. The man who handled things, the man who made decisions no one else wanted to make, the man you trusted because you didn't want to question him. His house was exactly what you'd expect, large, quiet, perfectly maintained. Lights on, curtains half drawn. Nothing out of place. He opened the door before I even knocked. I figured you'd come, he said. Of course he did. Can we talk? I asked. He stepped aside without a word. We sat in his living room, the same one where every family holiday had taken place for the past 10 years. Same leather chairs, same framed photos, same carefully curated sense of stability, but now it felt staged, like a set designed to reinforce a story that didn't quite hold up anymore. I went to the hospital today, I said. Victor didn't react immediately. He poured himself a drink first, slow and deliberate. And he asked. They documented his condition, I said. His tremors, his confusion, his reliance on you. He took a sip, then set the glass down. That doesn't mean he didn't understand what he was signing. It means he couldn't have signed the way that document shows, I replied. Not without assistance. Not without pressure. Victor leaned back slightly. You're interpreting medical notes, he said. That's not the same as being there. I was there, I said sharper now. Not every day, but enough to know the difference between a good hour and a bad one. And that signature wasn't from either. He studied me for a moment. Not defensive, not angry. Assessing. You've always been observant, he said finally. That's part of what made your grandfather respect you. Past tense. I let it pass. Then why are you doing this? I asked. That was the first time I asked the question directly. Not about the document, not about the accusation, about the intention. Victor didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked over to a cabinet, and pulled out a folder, the same kind I'd seen on his desk before. Clean, structured, intentional. He brought it back and placed it on the table between us. You're focusing on the wrong thing, he said. Am I? Yes, he said. Because you think this is about one document. My chest tightened slightly, because that was exactly what Lena had said. There's more, I said. Of course there is, he replied. I didn't reach for the folder. Then explain it. He exhaled slowly like he was preparing to say something reasonable. Measured. Your grandfather built something over his lifetime, he said. Property, investments, structures that require management. I know that, I said. What you don't know, he continued, is how quickly those things fall apart when no one is actively holding them together. That's not what this is about, I said. It is, he said calmly. Because without centralized control, assets get divided, mismanaged, lost. I've seen it happen. So your solution was to forge documents, I asked. His expression didn't change. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He leaned forward slightly. What I did, he said, was ensure continuity. The word landed harder than anything else he'd said. Continuity. Not ownership. Not theft. Continuity. You ensured control, I said. I ensured stability, he corrected. At whose expense, he didn't answer that. Instead, he tapped the folder lightly. That document you're so focused on, he said. It's not the one that matters. There it was. I felt it before he even opened it. The shift. The layer beneath the accusation. What's in there, I asked. He opened the folder slowly and turned it toward me. Inside was another document. Different format. Different structure. But the same name at the top. William Hayes. This, Victor said, is what your grandfather signed 2 days before he passed. I leaned forward despite myself. Because whatever this was, it had been kept back. Held. Used at the right moment. What is it, I asked. A directive, he said, regarding oversight of the estate. I scanned the page quickly. Legal language. Dense. Structured. But one phrase stood out. Sole administrative authority. Assigned to Victor Hayes. My grip tightened on the edge of the table. You're saying he gave you full control, I said. I'm saying he understood what needed to be done, Victor replied. And you just happened to be the one who explained it to him, I said. I was the one who was there, he said. There it was again. Presence. Not consent. Not clarity. Presence. Who notarized this, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Victor didn't hesitate. Thomas Hale. Of course. And no one else has seen this, I asked. Not yet, he said, because I wanted to resolve things internally first. Internally. Before it became public. Before it could be challenged. Before anyone could connect the pattern. You accused me to distract from this, I said. Victor didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just watched me, waiting to see if I could put it together on my own. You needed a narrative. I continued slowly. Something that explains irregularities before anyone looks too closely. You're assuming a lot, he said. I'm observing. I corrected. Silence settled between us. Not tense, not explosive, just clear. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to what he was saying. I was seeing how it all fit. The document with my name on it. The witness placing me at the scene. The notary confirming a clean process. The expert ready to validate the forgery. It wasn't just about making me look guilty. It was about making everything else look legitimate by comparison. Because if I was the problem, then nothing else needed to be questioned. You built this carefully, I said. Victor gave a small nod. I managed it carefully, he corrected. I stood up, because sitting there any longer felt like agreeing to something I hadn't accepted. This isn't going to hold, I said. He didn't move. That depends, he replied. On what? On how far you're willing to take it, he said. Because once this leaves the family, it becomes something else. A warning, not loud, not aggressive, but clear. If you push this, he continued, you don't just challenge me. You challenge everything your grandfather put in place. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, no. I challenge what you changed. And for the first time, his expression shifted. Not much, but enough. I turned and walked toward the door. Ariana, he said behind me. I stopped. Be careful, he added. Not everything is as simple as you think. I didn't turn around. Neither is control, I said, especially when it leaves a trail. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel. Because Lena was right. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. Who held it? Who lost it? And how far someone would go to keep it. My phone buzzed again. A message from Lena. Got something on the handwriting expert, it read. I stared at the screen for a second. Then I opened it. One more thing you need to know before the next meeting. I typed back quickly. What is it? Her reply came almost immediately. He wasn't hired by your uncle. I frowned. Then who hired him? There was a pause, long enough to feel intentional. Then her answer appeared. Your grandfather. I read Lena's message twice before I responded. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't filling in meaning that wasn't there. He wasn't hired by your uncle, your grandfather. I called her immediately. You're sure? I asked the second she picked up. As sure as I can be without pulling the original contract, Lena said. But I found a billing reference tied to your grandfather's estate account. Same name, Dr. Alan Reeves. I leaned back in my seat, staring through the windshield without really seeing anything. That doesn't make sense, I said. Why would he hire a handwriting expert? Think about what he was dealing with, she replied. Declining health, reliance on someone else to communicate, assets being managed around him. A quiet realization started forming, not all at once, but piece by piece. He didn't trust something I said, or someone, Lena added. I exhaled slowly. Because if that was true, then the expert walking into that room tomorrow wasn't just another voice Victor had lined up. He was a variable Victor didn't fully control. When's the next meeting? Lena asked. Tomorrow morning, I said. Victor wants to resolve things internally. She gave a soft, knowing breath. Of course he does. I'm bringing everything I said. Logs, medical records, timeline. Good, she replied. But don't lead with it. What do you mean? Let them present their case first, she said. Let the expert speak before you show your hand. I frowned slightly. Why? Because if Reeves was brought in by your grandfather, she said, then he's not there to defend your uncle's narrative. He's there to tell the truth about the signature. And if Victor doesn't realize that, then he's about to walk into his own setup, she finished. A small, steady feeling settled in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but alignment. For the first time since this started, the pieces weren't just defensive. They were starting to move forward. Okay, I said. We do this carefully. We do this precisely, Lena corrected. The next morning, I arrived at the law office 10 minutes early, not because I needed time to prepare, but because I wanted to see who walked in and how. Mr. Collins was already there organizing files with a kind of quiet efficiency that suggested he knew this meeting wasn't going to stay simple. Denise came in next, avoiding eye contact with me. Victor arrived last, confident, composed, carrying the same folder he had shown me the night before. He gave me a brief nod like nothing had shifted, like the conversation we'd had didn't matter. Maybe to him it didn't. Then the door opened again, and Dr. Alan Reeves walked in. Mid-60s, clean-cut, neutral expression. The kind of presence that doesn't draw attention, but doesn't disappear either. He greeted Mr. Collins first, then Victor, then finally he looked at me, and for just a second there was recognition. Not familiarity, but awareness. Like he knew exactly why I was there. Shall we begin? Mr. Collins said, taking his seat. Victor didn't waste time. As we discussed, he said, addressing the room, there are serious concerns regarding the authenticity of a document presented shortly before my father's passing. He slid the paper across the table again. Same document, same signature, same accusation. Dr. Reeves took it without comment. He didn't rush, didn't react. He adjusted his glasses slightly and began examining the signature with a small magnifier he had brought with him. The room went quiet, not tense, focused. Victor leaned back, watching him with quiet confidence. Denise sat still, arms crossed. Mr. Collins observed without interrupting. And I didn't say anything. I let the silence do its work, because this wasn't about arguing, it was about what could be seen. After a few minutes, Dr. Reeves set the magnifier down. He didn't look at Victor first. He looked at the document, then at me, then back at the document again. What are your findings? Victor asked. Calm, controlled, expectant. Dr. Reeves spoke evenly. This signature, he said, is not consistent with natural writing under the conditions described. Victor's expression didn't change, meaning he asked. It shows characteristics of simulated tracing, Reeves continued. The line quality is too controlled. The pressure is uniform. There is a lack of natural tremor variation. I saw Denise shift slightly in her chair. Victor didn't. Which suggests forgery, Victor said. Reeves shook his head once. Not in the way you're implying. That was the first crack. Small, but unmistakable. Victor leaned forward slightly. Then clarify. Reeves folded his hands. This is not the work of someone imitating a signature from memory, he said. It is the work of someone reproducing a known signature through repeated practice or direct tracing. Silence settled again. He let it, then added, typically by someone with prolonged access to authentic samples. That time when he looked up, he didn't look at me. He looked at Victor, and he didn't look away. No one spoke. Because the implication didn't need to be stated. It was already there, in the phrasing, in the direction of his gaze, in the space that suddenly opened between what had been claimed and what could actually be supported. Victor broke the silence first. That's speculative, he said. You're describing possibilities. I'm describing patterns, Reeves replied calmly. Based on established analysis. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. And you can't identify the individual responsible, he pressed. No, Reeves said. That's not the role of handwriting analysis. But you can confirm it wasn't my father's authentic signature. Reeves paused, long enough to make everyone in the room pay attention. Then he said, I can confirm that it does not reflect the motor characteristics expected from an individual with documented tremors at the time. Mr. Collins leaned forward slightly. Documented. I reached into my bag and placed the envelope from the hospital on the table. Medical records, I said. Victor's eyes flicked to it. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because now, for the first time, he wasn't the only one controlling what came into the room. Reeves nodded slightly. If those records indicate significant tremor, then this signature is inconsistent with that condition. Another silence. But this one felt different. Not controlled. Not directed. Uncertain. Because the narrative had shifted. Not completely. Not yet, but enough that it couldn't go back to what it was. Victor leaned back, slowly recalibrating. I could see it happening. The adjustment. The search for a new angle. A new explanation. A new way to contain what was starting to slip. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because what Reeves had done wasn't finish the story. He had opened it. And once it was open, there was no way to close it without everything inside being examined. Reeves gathered his tools quietly. I can provide a full written report, he said, but based on what I've seen, this document requires further scrutiny. Further scrutiny. That was the phrase. Not accusation. Not conclusion. Scrutiny. The kind that pulls everything apart. Victor nodded once. Too quickly. We'll review your report, he said. But his voice had changed. Just slightly. Enough that I heard it. Enough that I knew this wasn't unfolding the way he had planned. As the meeting began to break, Mr. Collins looked at me. Ms. Morgan, he said it would be advisable to compile all supporting documentation moving forward. I already have, I replied, and I meant it, because this wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about finishing what had started. I gathered my things, but before I could stand, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lena. Short, direct, urgent. I found the second document's filing reference. I froze for half a second, then opened it. And what I read didn't just explain Victor's plan. It explained why he had needed me in it. He didn't just give himself control, Lena had written. He reassigned oversight if anything happens to him. My breath caught slightly, because there was only one question that mattered now. To who I typed it before I could think about it. To who, the reply came back almost instantly. To you. I didn't answer Lena right away. I just stared at the message. To you. It didn't fit. Not with the accusation, not with the setup, not with the version of me Victor had spent the last 24 hours constructing in front of everyone. If I was the person he was trying to discredit, why would he position me as the fallback, unless... I pushed the thought aside and stood up from the table. I'll send over everything by end of day, I said to Mr. Collins. He nodded. That would be wise. Victor didn't say anything as I walked past him, but I felt it. That shift again. Smaller this time. Tighter. Like something he hadn't accounted for had just entered the room, and he hadn't decided yet whether to acknowledge it or contain it. I didn't go home. I went straight back to Lena's apartment. She had everything spread out across the table, printouts, notes, a laptop with multiple tabs open, and that same focused look she had the night before. Show me, I said. She turned the screen toward me. This is the filing reference tied to the second document Victor showed you, she said. It's structured as a contingent administrative directive. Plain English, I said. If Victor becomes unable to manage the estate, she replied, control transfers to a secondary party. And that party is me, I said. She nodded. I let that settle. Because on the surface it didn't make sense. Victor had just accused me publicly, deliberately of fraud. Why name me as his replacement? Unless he didn't expect anyone to look closely enough to connect the two, I said slowly. Or Lena added, he expected you to be removed from the picture before it mattered. I looked at her. Removed how? She didn't answer immediately. Then legally discredited, possibly charged. At minimum excluded from any administrative role due to conflict of interest. That tracked. If I were formally accused of forgery, if my credibility were damaged, if my name was tied to fraud in estate documents, then any clause assigning me oversight would collapse automatically. And who does it go to after that, I asked. Lena clicked into another section. There's a tertiary fallback, she said, a corporate entity, owned by Victor. She didn't need to answer. The silence did it for her. I exhaled slowly. So he builds a chain, I said, puts me in the middle, makes me the weak link, then removes me. And everything roots back to him, Lena said. Through something that looks independent, I added. She nodded. It was clean. Too clean. Not just a single document. A system. One that accounted for failure points. One that anticipated resistance. One that used me not just as a scapegoat, but as a structural step. I leaned back slightly, letting the full picture settle into place. He didn't just need me blamed, I said. He needed me positioned. So the transition looks legitimate, Lena said. Exactly. Silence hung between us for a moment. Then Lena tapped the screen again. There's something else, she said. I looked up. The timing on the second document, she continued. It was filed 2 days before your grandfather passed, but not processed until after. Meaning it sat in a pending state, she said. Long enough that it could be adjusted, or used strategically. I felt something shift again, because that meant the document wasn't just about control, it was about timing. Victor didn't show it in the first meeting, I said. No, Lena replied. He held it, until he saw how things were going. Right. So when he brought it out, it wasn't to clarify anything. It was to steer the narrative, to introduce just enough complexity that no one would question the structure itself, just the person inside it. Me. I stood up and started pacing, not out of panic, out of focus. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about deciding where to apply pressure. He thinks this is contained, I said. He wants it contained, Lena corrected. And if it stays inside the family, I continued, then everything becomes subjective. Who believes who? Who trusts who? Which works in his favor, she said. I stopped pacing. Then we don't keep it inside. Lena looked at me carefully. You're sure? No, I said honestly. But I'm sure of one thing. What's that? If this goes further, it needs to be based on evidence, not narrative. She nodded slowly. Then we build the case, she said. We already have most of it, I replied. Alibi, medical records, handwriting analysis, financial transactions, notary pattern, and the structure of the directive, she added. Exactly. I picked up my phone. Who are you calling? Lena asked. I hesitated for just a second, because this was the line, the one Victor had warned me about. Once this left the family, it became something else. Then I said, someone who doesn't care about family dynamics, and does care about documentation, Lena said. Yeah. I stepped toward the window as the call rang. 1 ring, 2. Then a voice answered, Law Offices of Carter and Bell. I straightened slightly. My name is Ariana Morgan, I said. I'd like to speak with someone regarding a potential case involving estate fraud and document manipulation. There was a brief pause. Then hold, please. I looked back at Lena. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to, because we both knew what this meant. Not escalation for the sake of winning, not revenge. Exposure. Clarity. Accountability. The line clicked again. This is Daniel Bell, a new voice said. How can I help you? I took a breath, and then I said it. Not emotionally, not defensively, just clearly. I believe my uncle has constructed a series of documents to consolidate control over my grandfather's estate, I said, and I have evidence that those documents may not be valid. There was a pause on the other end. Not hesitation. Assessment. Do you have documentation to support that, he asked. Yes, I said. All of it. Enough to start, I replied. Another pause. Then I think we should meet. I ended the call and set the phone down. For a second the room felt still. Not tense, not uncertain. Just settled. Because for the first time since this started, the next step didn't depend on what Victor said, or what Denise believed, or what story anyone preferred. It depended on what could be proven, and once that process starts, it doesn't stop halfway. It goes all the way through, until everything holds, or everything breaks. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. I opened it. 1 line. No greeting. No explanation. You're making a mistake. I stared at it for a moment, then locked the screen, because that more than anything else so far told me exactly how close I was getting. The message didn't scare me, not in the way it probably was meant to. It clarified something. Because threats, subtle or otherwise, only show up when someone feels pressure. And Victor hadn't felt pressure before. He had controlled the timeline, the narrative, the room. Now something had shifted, and he knew it. Daniel Bell's office didn't look like Victor's. There was no curated warmth, no family photos, no attempt to soften the edges, just glass, steel, and order. A place built for facts. I handed over everything, badge logs, system activity, hospital records, the notary pattern Lena found, the structure of the directive. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He read, carefully, occasionally making a note. Walk me through the sequence, he said after a while. So I did, from the accusation, to Denise's statement, to Hale's notarization, to the handwriting analysis, to the second document. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't simplify it. I gave it to him the way I would present a compliance case. Clean, verifiable, layered. When I finished, he sat back slightly. Okay, he said. Let's separate what we know from what we can prove. That was the difference. Knowing something doesn't matter in a room like this. proving it does. You have a strong alibi, he continued. That removes you from direct involvement in the alleged forgery. I nodded. You have medical documentation that raises serious questions about your grandfather's capacity, another nod. You have a handwriting expert who has already indicated the signature is inconsistent with natural writing under those conditions. Yes. And you have a pattern of notarized documents tied to the same individual, your uncle. Yes. He tapped his pen once against the table. That's enough to justify further legal inquiry, he said. Possibly more. More, I asked. He met my eyes. If the documents were created or executed under misrepresentation, he said we're looking at potential civil liability, possibly criminal exposure depending on intent. Intent. That word mattered, because nothing Victor had done looked accidental. Can we challenge the documents, I asked. Yes, Daniel said. We can file to invalidate them. But that's not the only move here. What else is there? He leaned forward slightly. We can request a formal investigation into the estate handling process, he said. That brings in external review, subpoenas, financial tracing. That would pull everything into the open. Not just the document with my name on it. Everything. You said he built a structure, Daniel continued. Structures leave records, transactions, communications. And if those don't line up, they collapse, he finished. Silence settled between us. Not uncertain. Focused. Do it, I said. He nodded once. I'll start the process, he said, but understand something, Ms. Morgan. I waited. This won't stay contained, he said. Once this moves forward, it becomes a matter of record. I know. And your family will be part of that record. I held his gaze. I know, I repeated, because that was the part Victor had counted on, that I would hesitate, that I would pull back before it went that far, that I would choose silence over exposure. I had built his entire position on that assumption. He was wrong. The response came faster than I expected. Victor requested a meeting. Not a family meeting. A legal one. Daniel was there. So was Mr. Collins. Denise sat quietly to one side, her confidence from before replaced with something more cautious. Victor looked different. Not undone, but not as certain. You've escalated this, he said, looking at me directly. I've documented it, I replied. He exhaled slowly. This didn't need to leave the family. It already had, I said. You just wanted to control how. Daniel spoke then. We've reviewed the materials, he said, and we're prepared to challenge the validity of the documents in question. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. You're basing that on speculation, he said. No, Daniel replied calmly. We're basing it on inconsistencies, documented capacity concerns, and expert analysis. Victor shifted his attention to him. And what exactly are you alleging? Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That the documents may not reflect the true intent or capacity of the decedent, he said, and that further review is necessary. Careful wording, precise. But the implication was clear. Victor leaned back slightly. And if they do, he asked. Then they'll hold, Daniel said. That's how process works. Another silence. This one tighter, more contained. Because this wasn't a family argument anymore. It was structure versus structure, process versus narrative. Victor looked back at me. You're willing to put everything under scrutiny, he said. All of it. Yes. And if that affects more than just me, I didn't look away, then it affects more than just you. Something in his expression shifted then. Not anger, not frustration. Recognition. Like he was seeing the line I had crossed and realizing I wasn't stepping back from it. He looked down at the documents in front of him, then back up. And for the first time, he didn't try to redirect. didn't try to reframe. He just said I did what I thought was necessary. It wasn't a full admission, but it wasn't a denial either. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because that sentence in this context was enough to open the door the rest of the way. Victor exhaled again, slower this time. I wasn't trying to take anything from you, he said. Then why put my name in it? I asked. He held my gaze. Because you were the only one who would understand what needed to be done. The answer landed in a way I didn't expect. Not as justification, not as apology, but as something closer to truth. You didn't trust anyone else, I said. No, he replied. And you didn't trust me enough to ask. He didn't answer that, because he didn't need to. We both knew. Trust requires giving someone a choice. Control doesn't. Victor had chosen control and built everything around it. Daniel gathered his papers. We'll proceed with formal review, he said. Victor nodded once, not agreeing, not resisting, just acknowledging. As the meeting ended, Denise stood up slowly. She looked at me, hesitated, then said, I thought I saw you that day. I met her eyes. I know. She nodded slightly, like that was all she could say right now. Maybe it was, because this wasn't about convincing everyone anymore. It was about letting the process do what it was designed to do. And once that process starts, it doesn't stop at half-truths. It keeps going, until there's nothing left to interpret, only what is. The investigation didn't explode. It unfolded, quietly, methodically, piece by piece. That was the part I hadn't expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no sudden confessions, no moment where everything collapsed at once. Instead, there were requests, subpoenas, document reviews, bank records pulled and cross-referenced, email chains reconstructed, notary logs examined in full, not just the entries Victor had relied on. And the more it moved forward, the more the pattern stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like design. 3 months later, we were back in a courtroom, not for a trial, for a determination. Whether the documents Victor had introduced could stand as valid expressions of my grandfather's intent. Daniel laid it out simply. Alibi evidence, placing me at work during the alleged signing. Medical records documenting cognitive decline and physical tremors. Handwriting analysis, identifying simulated tracing. A documented pattern of repeated notarizations involving the same parties. And the structural directive that positioned me as both participant and disqualifiable link. No single piece proved everything, but together they didn't leave much room for interpretation. Victor didn't argue the way he had in the beginning. He didn't try to redirect, didn't try to frame it as misunderstanding. He answered questions, carefully, sometimes narrowly, but without the same certainty he had before. When the judge asked about the process behind the documents, Victor used the same word he had used with me. Continuity. When asked why he hadn't involved other family members more directly, efficiency. When asked whether my grandfather had fully understood the implications, a pause, long enough to matter. I believe he trusted me to act in his best interest. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was the closest thing to an answer that still left space. And that space is where the decision lived. The ruling wasn't dramatic either, just clear. The primary document, the one with my name, was deemed unreliable due to inconsistencies in execution and contradiction with verified alibi evidence. The secondary directive. Victor's claim to sole administrative authority was invalidated based on concerns regarding capacity and procedural integrity. Both were set aside. The estate would be reassessed under prior valid documentation. Oversight would be reassigned this time with independent supervision. Not Victor, not me, someone neutral. It wasn't a victory in the way people expect. There was no moment of triumph, no sense of winning, just a quiet shift. Control. Released back into process. Victor didn't speak to me after the ruling. He nodded once as he left the courtroom. Not acknowledgement, not apology, just closure in his own way. Denise did come up to me. I should have checked before I said anything she said. Her voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was smaller, honest. I should have too, I said, because that was true. Not about the document, but about everything that had come before it. All the times I had let Victor handle things. All the times I had chosen distance instead of attention. Trust when left unexamined becomes assumption, and assumption leaves space for someone else to decide what's true. I didn't go back to Victor's house after that. I didn't go back to the version of the family that existed around him either. Some of them stayed close to him. Some drifted. Some tried to reconnect with me. I didn't push anyone away, but I didn't pull anyone closer either. For the first time, I let distance be intentional, not reactive, not defensive, just chosen. A few weeks later, I went back to my grandfather's house. It was quieter than I remembered. Or maybe I was. I stood in the kitchen for a while looking at the same table where we used to sit, where he used to try to pour his own coffee even when his hands wouldn't cooperate. I thought about what Victor had said, that he was trying to hold everything together, and in a way he had been, just not in a way that allowed anyone else to exist inside it. Control doesn't break things all at once. It reshapes them, slowly, until they only work one way, his way. I picked up the old ceramic mug from the counter, ran my thumb along the edge, then set it back down. Because some things don't need to be held onto to be understood. I still work in compliance, still build cases out of timelines and patterns and quiet inconsistencies. But this one changed something. Not in how I do my job, in how I look at people, at systems, at the spaces where trust replaces verification. Because the hardest part of this wasn't proving the documents were wrong. It was accepting that the person who created them thought he was right. If you've ever been in a position where someone used family to justify control, or asked you to stay quiet to keep things together, you already know how complicated that line can be. There's a difference between protecting something and owning it, between helping and deciding. And just because someone believes they're doing the right thing doesn't mean they are. For me, the line became simple. Truth over comfort, process over narrative, and boundaries over access. That doesn't mean I hate my family. It just means I understand where I end and where they begin, and that understanding is what finally gave me peace. If you've experienced something similar, I'd really like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if stories like this resonate with you, you're always welcome to stay, listen, and be part of this space. This story is fictional and created for entertainment, education, and reflection.